I grew up thinking my family's traditions were sacred, until I found the hidden book of names. Now I can't tell if I saved lives or destroyed everything. Either way, they'll never forgive me for what I did. You know how some families measure a girl's worth by her grades or her manners or her job? In my family it was the scale. The heavier the daughter, the bigger the bride price. And they meant that literally. When a girl turned 13, she didn't get a sweet 16 to look forward to. She got shipped off to the fattening house, a 2-year sentence where you were expected to put on at least 200 pounds. If you failed, there were consequences. Ugly ones. I used to think it was just tradition, until I found the book. It was my grandmother's, hidden deep in her closet. I'd been looking for Eid money when I stumbled across it. 3 battered notebooks, every page filled with names, ages, weights, and deaths. 47 girls who didn't survive the process. Amara, 22, heart failure at 389 pounds. Fatu, 19, diabetic coma at 412. Mariama, 24, stroke at 445. And beside each tragedy? A number. Not a date, a dollar amount. Sale price. Profit margins. My grandmother had even subtracted funeral expenses. Fatu's death? A net gain of $85,000. I wanted to be sick. So I decided I wasn't going to survive this, I was going to fight it. I started small. Told everyone I was forming a cooking circle for younger girls to prepare them for the fattening house. But we weren't learning recipes. We were learning chemistry. The exact salt-to-water ratio that would make you carry 20 extra pounds on weigh-in day. How to stitch a fat suit from layered cloth and foam. Herbal teas that shrank your appetite but left your face looking puffy. We got creative. We practiced hiding food in our cheeks and spitting it out later. Learned to make weight gain shakes that were nothing but protein powder and laxatives. We even bought a busted scale that added 80 pounds automatically and swapped it in during official checks. By the time I turned 13, I'd built a network of 15 girls, all masters of fake fattening. We'd learned how to walk slow, breathe heavy, and pose so that photos made us look 50 pounds bigger. The house mothers called us their best girls. They had no idea. And then came Decca's marriage viewing. She was supposed to weigh 300 pounds after her 2 years inside. But when her suit slipped during the undressing ceremony, the truth was out. 1:30 maybe. The room went silent, then erupted. The groom's family demanded their money back. My uncle grabbed her by the hair, screaming about honor. That's when it happened. 23 girls stood up together. And one by one we started peeling off our own suits. Weighted hems thudded to the floor like war drums. I pulled out my phone. Every page of that death book, photographed and ready. Names, ages, weights, profits. I held it high for everyone to see. My grandmother's face turned a violent shade of purple. Someone called the police. My mother tried to wrench the phone from my hand, nails digging into my wrist, but I broke free and pushed toward the officers. The lead cop, a woman with silver in her hair, took one look and radioed for backup. She pulled us into a corner, forming a human shield while more uniforms poured in. The house mothers arrived, pale as chalk, staring at the busted scale we'd rigged. One of them fainted. We spent hours giving statements. Outside, our families paced like caged animals. Some parents wept when they saw our real bodies. Others raged about lost money. Bloodlines split in an instant. By morning, half the families had pulled their daughters out of our group, afraid of being tainted by the scandal. My parents locked me in my room, taking shifts so I couldn't escape. I heard my grandmother plotting damage control through the wall, moving the fattening house, hiring guards, tightening surveillance. But I'd been ready for this. I'd uploaded everything, death records, photos, to multiple cloud accounts. Even locked away, I knew the truth was slipping beyond their control. Their first target was my sister Kayla. They shoved her back into the fattening house with a personal monitor who watched every bite. But Kayla was a quick study. She could hold food in her cheeks for hours, letting it dissolve rather than swallowing. So they got more aggressive. Forced mouth checks. Weigh-ins before and after the bathroom. Cameras in the dorms. And still, we adapted. Because once you've tasted freedom, you'll do anything to keep it. Some girls got so good at resisting, it was like watching an underground science experiment unfold in real time. They learned to press specific points on their jaw and neck to trigger silent vomiting. Figured out spice blends that caused temporary swelling, making faces look rounder and bellies appear bloated for weigh-ins. They even turned lullabies and work songs into coded instructions, whispering survival tactics during rest periods while the house mothers thought we were napping. 3 weeks after the wedding viewing explosion, our first crack appeared. Amina. Her family had threatened her younger sisters, her father had screamed until his voice broke, and one night she showed up at my window, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. She told me she was giving in. Going back to the fattening willingly. It hurt. God, it hurt. But I couldn't hate her for it. We always knew, not everyone could survive the full weight of their family's wrath. Meanwhile, the investigation crawled forward at the speed of melting ice. Police came and went, asking questions, but when they returned to re-interview the girls, many had already changed their stories. Parents claimed the death records were fake, the scales had been tampered with, that we were poisoned by modern thinking. The only thing they couldn't argue away was the modified scale, but even that wasn't enough to shut the whole system down. Then my aunt came to the door with her own little deal. If I went on record apologizing, admitting I'd lied and agreed to enter the fattening house, they'd only keep me there for 6 months. She said it like she was offering me a gift. Like I should thank her for cutting my sentence in half. I told her no. That night I was moved to my grandmother's compound. And if my old life had been a cage, this was solitary confinement. No phone. No visitors. No way to send a message out. They thought cutting me off from the others would be the end of me. They didn't understand what we'd built. Our network ran deeper than they could imagine. Laundry lines turned into telegraph wires. Kitchen staff became messengers. Even the youngest kids carried scraps of information, hidden inside folded notes tucked into aprons or food baskets. It still amazes me how an entire resistance bloomed in plain sight, right under the noses of the people running the very system we were dismantling. Our first real breakthrough came from Fatima. Her parents threatened to disown her, even marry her off early, but she didn't flinch. She told the police everything, the forced feedings, the punishments, the health problems. She named names. And because she stood firm, 3 more girls found the courage to hold their ground. That was when the health inspectors arrived. They walked into the fattening house with notebooks and cameras, and walked out looking pale. They found girls with untreated diabetes and hypertension. Some couldn't stand without help. Ankles the size of grapefruits. Others were so swollen from fluid retention they had to be carried. The feeding logs read like military schedules, 6, sometimes 7, massive meals a day. My grandmother wasted no time. She rallied the other matriarchs into a united front, crying cultural persecution to anyone who'd listen. They hired lawyers, spun stories about how this was all voluntary, all tradition. But the cracks were showing. Some mothers, after reading the death records and medical notes, started asking the dangerous question, is this worth my daughter's life? The real turning point came from Marama's mother. She found her daughter's journal, every punishment, every night she'd cried herself to sleep from the pain, every detail of the meals that made her sick. She read the whole thing, and then walked straight into the police station to hand it over. She didn't just back her daughter, she blew a hole straight through the matriarch's armor. That night, the compound was alive until sunrise. Cars pulling in. Doors slamming. Raised voices in the main hall. I heard everything from my window. Some wanted to speed up the fattening to secure value before the law stepped in, others begged for reforms, but my grandmother and her closest allies refused to change a thing. This was their empire, and they weren't about to let it crumble without a fight. Still, you could see the split. Progressive families pulled their daughters out. The hardliners dug in, moving their operations underground. And even though I was locked away, I knew the movement was bigger than me now. Then came the raid. Police, health officials, social workers, all marching into the fattening house like an army. What they saw turned even seasoned officers green. Mattresses stained with sweat and urine. Girls with sores, infections, joints so damaged they could barely bend. Feeding logs that read like a torture manual. Blood work showing liver damage, kidney strain, cholesterol levels that could kill. The house mothers tried to spin it, said the girls already had health problems, that the process had nothing to do with it. But the evidence spoke louder than any lie. The closer the investigation got, the tighter my prison became. They moved me to an interior room, no windows, no view, no sunlight. 2 guards outside at all times. Meals brought in with the expectation I'd start my fattening process. I refused. Every trick I'd taught the others I used on myself, hiding food in my cheeks, letting it dissolve, faking swallows. It drove the guards crazy. One day my grandmother came with reinforcements, 4 women to hold me down while a 5th tried to shove a feeding tube into my throat. I fought like a cornered animal. Bit down, thrashed, made it impossible. They left me bruised but not broken. The compound turned into a fortress. Guards patrolled, deliveries were searched, even children were interrogated. But still, the network found me. One sympathetic guard slipped me news, the investigation had gone national. Health officials from the capital were now involved. The hardliners panicked. Some doubled the feeding schedules. Girls sedated, fed in their sleep. Potential grooms were starting to back away. What if she dies before the wedding? They whispered. My mother came to me late one night sobbing. She begged me to give in. Said I was killing our family's honor. My father tried another tactic, brought photo albums, pointed to smiling brides, talked about tradition and value. But all I could see were those numbers in the death books. And then the biggest blow. Salma. My grandmother's favorite. She found a second set of records in an old storage room. 50 years of deaths, profits, letters between families, even detailed instructions for hiding fatalities. Salma had been raised by my grandmother after losing her parents, and still she chose the truth. She photographed every page and smuggled it out through a kitchen worker. Those pages didn't just prove abuse. They proved this was never about culture, it was a business model. Calculated. Profitable. Organized. The walls started closing in. House mothers flipped on my grandmother to save themselves, spilling every name, every supplier, every doctor who'd falsified certificates. Even the guards were starting to whisper, wondering if protecting her was worth a prison sentence. They tried breaking me with hunger next. Took away my bed, left me a mat on the floor, made my meals irregular. But it only sharpened my resolve. I kept moving, kept training my body in secret. At night, I'd whisper the names from the death books like a prayer, so none of them would be forgotten. And outside, the world was watching. Journalists sniffing around. Social media buzzing with rumors. International health groups issuing statements. Girls escaping. Advocacy groups sheltering them. Then I heard about Kayla. She gained 40 pounds in 2 months. Could barely walk. Ankles swollen, coughing from the pressure on her lungs. The house mothers paraded her as proof of success, until a nurse, bless her soul, documented everything and leaked it. Those photos, her joints, her breathless face, they became more proof that this system wasn't just cruel. It was deadly. My grandmother had one last card to play. She called a gathering of every loyal, tradition-bound family, selling them a compromise. Her pitch? An internal oversight council, our own so-called ethics board, that would regulate the fattening process. Set reasonable weight goals. Bring in doctors for token checkups. She framed it like a noble middle ground, tradition preserved, danger reduced. But the room split down the middle. Some nodded, saying the world was changing and this might be the only way to survive it. Others hissed that any change was betrayal. What started as a polite meeting spiraled into shouting matches, mothers accusing each other of weakness, cowardice, and selling out their ancestors. For decades, my grandmother had kept her followers unified through fear and loyalty. That night, the wall cracked. Outside that crumbling alliance, the investigators had built their case piece by piece. They'd followed the money, millions in bride price transactions. They'd gathered testimony from medical experts about the catastrophic effects of rapid weight gain. They'd convinced former house mothers to describe, in sickening detail, the psychological warfare used to break girls' resistance. Even the compound's own guards began to disappear. Some slipped away in the dark, too afraid to face criminal charges. Others switched sides. Brought food. Passed messages. My grandmother's grip was loosening with every defection. In my cell, I scratched days into the wall with a chunk of broken concrete. 63 marks. 63 days of hunger, darkness, and defiance. My body was a shadow of itself, but my mind was sharper than ever. I used those long hours to rehearse the statement I'd give when I was finally free, every fact, every name, every number locked in place. Then came the push we'd been waiting for. Marama's mother didn't stop at handing over her daughter's journal, she organized. She rallied the progressive mothers into a coordinated strike. On the same day at the same hour, they showed up at fattening houses all over the district. Some brought health workers. Others came with lawyers. At my grandmother's gate, the scene turned explosive. Mothers who'd once braided each other's hair were now squaring off, screaming across the courtyard. Demands to release daughters clashed with vows to protect tradition. Police had to step in just to keep the crowd from tearing itself apart. And then my grandmother appeared. Cane tapping on the concrete, eyes sharp with contempt. She called them weak. Said weak mothers raise weak daughters. Accused them of letting foreign corruption rot their families from the inside. But her voice didn't carry the same weight anymore, it sounded desperate. Then the real blow landed. Traditional mothers, her own allies, stepped forward and confessed. Their daughters had died in the fattening house. They'd stayed silent out of fear and shame, but now with evidence piling up, they couldn't carry the guilt anymore. Each story drove another nail into my grandmother's empire. My uncle tried to turn the tide through force. He grabbed one progressive mother, shaking her, spitting about honor. She didn't back down, and in seconds other women closed around her like a shield. His intimidation, meant to silence, only solidified their resistance. From my dark cell I couldn't see, but I could hear it, the shouting, the chaos. My guard abandoned her post to watch, leaving me pressed against the ventilation grate, trying to catch every word. Hours passed. No one left. The progressive mothers pitched tents in the courtyard, preparing to stay until their daughters were free. And that night, something shifted. Guards whispering. Cooks wiping tears. Servants moving with quiet finality. The empire was crumbling. Morning brought the hammer down. Health officials arrived with court orders and backup. Social workers. Doctors. Police in larger numbers than I'd ever seen here. My grandmother's lawyers barked objections, overruled in seconds. Room by room they freed the girls. Some ran into their mother's arms. Others stood dazed, not sure what freedom even felt like anymore. Medical teams found everything: starvation in the resistors, morbid obesity in the broken, untreated infections, organ strain, joint damage. When they opened my door I was so weak I had to brace against the wall to stand. 64 days of fighting had stripped me down, but I hadn't surrendered. A health worker knelt beside me, hands trembling as she documented my bruises from the force feedings and the physical decay from isolation. Outside my mother waited. Her face was a storm, relief and guilt battling for dominance. I walked past her without a word. Forgiveness would take more than tears. The compound emptied fast. Girls either went home with mothers who'd fought for them or were taken into protective care. My grandmother watched from her window silent as her life's work collapsed before her eyes. The matriarchs now faced frozen assets and criminal investigations. But it wasn't over. Some families went underground, whispering about starting over somewhere new. They spun propaganda claiming outsiders had destroyed our culture. But we fought back. We told our stories to anyone who would listen: village meetings, health conferences, journalists. We carried the death books everywhere, letting the names speak for themselves. Kayla needed months of treatment just to walk without pain. The fattening had wrecked her joints and strained her heart. Watching her struggle across a room was enough to silence anyone claiming this was harmless tradition. She became one of our most powerful voices, her body living proof of the cost. The investigation peeled back every layer. The money. The suppliers. The doctors who falsified health certificates. Even officials who'd been on the take. They called it tradition, but the paper trail told another story: a multi-million-dollar industry. Some hardliners tried to modernize the practice, suggesting smaller weight gains. They missed the point entirely. We weren't negotiating over how much abuse was acceptable. We were saying no. Period. The network we'd built became something more: a lifeline. Safe houses. Medical care. Education for the girls whose schooling had been stolen. Every survivor we helped was another piece of the wall they'd never rebuild. My grandmother tried one last scare tactic. Any girl who refused tradition would be cut off forever. No inheritance. No family name. She thought abandonment would make us crawl back. It didn't. It lit a fire. If the choice was between our lives and their approval, we chose life. The health ministry's final report pulled no punches: systematic abuse, medical neglect, preventable deaths. Criminal charges for the worst offenders. A mandate to reform any tradition that endangered health. Testifying was brutal. Some girls froze, their trauma too raw. We held their hands, filled the silence, made sure no one stood alone. In court, the defense tried to hide behind cultural relativism, saying outsiders couldn't understand. But we weren't outsiders, we were their daughters. The ones who'd lived it. The ones who'd survived. My grandmother sat stone-faced through most of it, until the profit ledgers were brought out. Page after page, cold calculations of what each girl's life was worth, including her own granddaughters. That was when the mask cracked. And I still wonder, what finally made those traditional mothers speak? What moment pushed them past years of silence into finally standing beside us? Winning didn't mean the fight was over. It just meant the battlefield changed. Our villages split into camps, some embracing the reforms we'd fought for, some clinging to the old ways like a lifeline. A few tried to strike a balance, keeping parts of the culture but dropping the forced fattening. But the diehards? They dug in deeper, calling any compromise a betrayal of our ancestors. We knew real change would take more than a courtroom win. So we went to work. We started education programs for girls, lessons on nutrition, health, and bodily autonomy. We built small businesses to replace the income families once earned through bride prices. We set up clinics to treat the injuries, both visible and hidden, from years in the fattening houses. The network that had once passed recipes for fake weight gain now traded advice on rebuilding lives. We helped each other through awkward reunions with family, job training, and the slow, painful climb out of trauma. Home was still complicated. My mother, in her own way, tried to make amends, plates of food outside my door, mending my torn clothes. My father buried himself in work, avoiding my eyes, unwilling to face what he'd been part of. Only my younger cousins seemed to truly understand. They saw our strength, and they weren't afraid to ask questions. But my grandmother's reach ran deeper than we'd guessed. Shops stopped selling to progressive families. Water deliveries mysteriously failed to arrive. Even the clinic turned girls away if they were known rebels. Bank accounts stalled, school expulsions came out of nowhere, and basic documents became impossible to get without jumping through endless hoops. The traditional families rebuilt with chilling speed. They opened new fattening houses far from prying eyes, targeting poorer villages where our message hadn't yet reached. This time, they skipped the bowls of millet and went straight to hormone injections, faster results, fewer obvious signs of force. Kayla's healing was slow. Every day, we worked her through secret physical therapy, each movement a reminder of what the tradition had stolen. Her face tightened in pain, but she never stopped. We adapted too. Underground meetings rotated through safe spots. We mapped which families were still practicing, which doctors could be trusted, and which markets would sell to us without questions. We even developed a silent alert system with colored fabrics on laundry lines: red for danger, yellow for suspicion, green for safe. Then, Fatima disappeared. Her family said she'd gone to visit relatives. We knew better. We'd seen this pattern, the missing girls who came back months later with empty eyes and forced smiles. It was a warning: resist long enough and they'd make you disappear. We built faster escape routes. More safe houses. Quiet alliances with mothers who'd lost daughters but never spoken up. And we took on the economic fight too, creating income streams for families who no longer wanted to sell their daughters but couldn't see another way to survive. Inside my own home, meals were silent battles. Every bite tasted like a dare. My cousins watched, caught between the elders' authority and the allure of freedom. Those house mothers who'd testified paid dearly, ostracized, disowned, and sometimes targeted in accidents that didn't feel accidental. We moved them constantly, never letting anyone stay in one place too long. Selma, my grandmother's once favorite, lived under constant watch. Her every step tracked, her every conversation monitored. Betraying the matriarch came with a lifetime sentence. 6 months in, something remarkable happened. The fathers spoke. Men who had stayed silent finally said enough. They'd watched their daughters suffer and could no longer hide behind tradition. Their voices shook the old guard. Criticism from inside the patriarchal ranks couldn't be dismissed as outside interference. The hardliners responded by tightening control. Girls as young as 10 were sent away, isolated before we could reach them. The messages we intercepted from those children, they still haunt me. My relationship with my mother shifted the night she found proof my father had helped orchestrate Fatima's disappearance. She came to me in the dark and said the words I never expected: "We have to leave." That night, we slipped away to a safe house run by Marama's mother. By then, our network was an underground railroad. Every relocation had to be planned like a military operation: coded notes, decoys, trusted escorts. The official investigation's conclusion was infuriating. They acknowledged the abuse but stopped short of banning the practice entirely. Instead, they issued guidelines the traditionalists immediately found ways to dodge. We shifted to prevention. Secret school visits. Recipe pamphlets that were actually guides to recognizing and resisting abuse. And we kept the death books alive, copies hidden everywhere, each name and weight a testimony no one could erase. Kayla became one of our strongest voices. Every step she took in pain, every breath that came hard was proof no one could deny. The tug of war continued. They used wealth to hold influence. We built cooperatives to bypass their control. Girls learned trades that gave them independence, skills no family decree could take. A year later, the lines were clear. Some communities had changed forever, others stayed locked in the past. My grandmother's health faded, but her will didn't. She ruled from her bed, still giving orders to keep the fattening houses alive in secret. We built clinics staffed with allies. The medical files piled high with diabetes, heart disease, joint destruction, depression, all traced back to the tradition. The younger generation gave us hope. They asked questions their mothers had never dared. They wanted to know why health was worth less than a bride price. Why daughters had to be bought and sold at all. My father left, unwilling to bend. His absence left space for my mother and me to try slowly to rebuild. We shared what we'd learned with other districts. Our methods spread, adapted to different villages. And then, 2 years after that infamous wedding viewing, something extraordinary happened. An entire extended family stood up in public and denounced the fattening tradition. They admitted it had harmed generations of their daughters. A patriarch took the microphone and said words that rippled through every household: "We were wrong." But for every door that opened, others slammed shut. The underground houses still ran, their locations known only to the most trusted insiders. We saved who we could. And we never stopped trying. Because even now, some girls are still trapped. And until the day no daughter's worth is measured in pounds, our fight isn't over. My role had shifted. I wasn't just the girl who fought back anymore. I'd become the one others came to for answers. Girls would pull me aside to ask, how do I stand up to my parents? How do I get out? How do I heal? And each time I thought of the death books, the ledgers that kept growing with names from hidden fattening houses we hadn't shut down yet. Every new entry was a reminder, our work couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. Then came my 18th birthday and with it, a choice. Our network needed someone who could speak both languages, tradition and progress, and navigate both worlds. My survival, my history, made me the obvious candidate. But stepping into that role meant letting go of the family members still loyal to my grandmother's empire. The final showdown came without warning. She sent word she wanted peace before she died. I agreed, but only with witnesses. I wouldn't walk into that compound alone. It wasn't peace. It was a trap. In the courtyard, house mothers spoon-fed bowls of millet to dozens of girls, some barely teenagers. My grandmother called it a restoration ceremony, a stage display to prove our rebellion had failed. To show that the old ways were alive and thriving. But she'd miscalculated. Because several of those girls? They were ours. They'd been placed there to watch, to report back. And at a signal we'd planned months before, they rose to their feet and peeled off fat suits just like we had at that wedding years earlier. Chaos exploded. Bowls clattered to the ground. Girls pushed away food. More joined in, rejecting the charade right in front of the elders. My grandmother's rage was so fierce it literally dropped her. She collapsed mid-yell and they had to carry her inside. As she disappeared through the doorway, I saw it, the shift. The crowd was seeing cracks in the stone they thought was unbreakable. The fallout was immediate. Families who'd stood by tradition began questioning it. The girls who'd revealed themselves became instant icons among their peers, proof that resistance was possible even deep inside the enemy's territory. We seized the momentum. We built real, public structures, no more hiding in kitchens and laundry lines. Education programs, job training, medical care. Progressive families pooled resources to replace the financial incentives that had kept the fattening alive. And my mother became one of our loudest voices. The same woman who once guarded the door to my prison now stood on stages admitting she'd been wrong. She talked about the shame, the regret, and the choice to do better. It gave other mothers permission to change without losing face. Of course, not everyone changed. Some simply rebranded the cruelty, finding safer ways to keep the system alive. And so we adapted, targeting those mutations of the tradition before they could root too deeply. It's been 5 years since that wedding viewing turned my life inside out. The fattening houses still exist, but they're smaller, weaker, hiding in shadows. Girls know now they have options. They can fight. Their bodies belong to them. Kayla still carries the damage. Her joints ache. Her breath catches if she walks too far. But she hasn't gone silent. Her story has saved girls we'll never even meet. She's proof that pain can become purpose. The death books, they've become a monument. We built a memorial where every name, every weight, every stolen life is recorded. People stand there and weep. And they understand. Last month my grandmother died. No apologies. No regrets. Her funeral split the town in two, mourners who called her a cultural guardian, and those who were relieved the tyrant was gone. I stood at the graveside with one of the girls she'd tried to destroy. We didn't cry. We didn't bow our heads. Our presence was our defiance. The fight hasn't ended. We track at-risk families. We intervene where we can. We celebrate every girl who walks free instead of being wheeled out. I've turned my work into a formal organization dedicated to ending harmful traditions from within communities, not by tearing culture apart, but by removing the rot that hides inside it. It's slow work. It requires patience, tact, and an unshakable commitment to protecting the next generation. And slowly, the economic machine that fed the fattening tradition is changing. Families are finding pride in daughters who use their skills, their minds, their leadership, not just their bodies. It's messy progress, but it's progress. The future isn't certain. The scars run deep. But those scars tell the truth of survival, resistance, and change. We carry them forward not as shame, but as proof. This work may never truly be finished. But we'll keep going. One girl, one family, one tradition at a time. If you enjoyed today's drama, just imagine what's waiting in the next one. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go find the next train wreck together. Thanks for watching.